Welcome to Z Cineplex, say your ultimate entertainment destination. Welcome to Z Cineplex, the home of entertainment, creativity, and cinematic excitement. Our channel is dedicated to bringing viewers a rich collection of engaging content that celebrates the world of movies, storytelling, and visual entertainment. Whether you're a passionate film enthusiast, someone who enjoys discovering new cinematic experiences, or simply looking for high-quality entertainment, Z Cineplex is designed to be your go-to destination. We strive to create content that is informative, enjoyable, and engaging for audiences of all ages, offering a unique blend of movie-related features, entertainment updates, insightful discussions, creative videos, and much more. Every upload is crafted with attention to quality, ensuring that our viewers receive an enjoyable experience that keeps them coming back for more. At Z Cineplex, we believe that cinema is more than just watching films. It's about experiencing emotions, exploring stories, appreciating creativity, and connecting with people who share the same passion for entertainment. Our mission is to build a vibrant community where movie lovers and entertainment enthusiasts can discover exciting content, share their opinions, and stay connected with the latest trends in the entertainment industry. We are committed to consistently improving our content, embracing new ideas, and delivering videos that entertain, inform, and inspire our growing audience. Whether you're here for movie highlights, entertainment discussions, reviews, cinematic moments, or fresh creative content, Z Cineplex promises an enjoyable journey filled with excitement, quality, and unforgettable entertainment. Join our community by subscribing, turning on notifications, and becoming part of the Z Cineplex family as we continue to explore the fascinating world of cinema and entertainment together. Thank you for your support, and welcome to Z Cineplex, where every video brings entertainment to life. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, is a 2016 American epic space opera and war film directed by Gareth Edwards and written by Chris Weitz and Tony Gilroy. From a story by John Nolan, Gary Whitta, produced by Lucasfilm and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, it is the first standalone film in the Star Wars anthology series and serves as a direct prequel to Star Wars, 1977, taking place shortly before the events of that film. The story focuses on an unconventional group of rebel operatives who undertake a desperate mission to steal the plans for the Galactic Empire's newly constructed Death Star, the planet-destroying super-weapon capable of annihilating entire worlds. The film stars Felicity Jones as Jyn Erso, Diego Luna as Captain Cassian Andor, Ben Mendelsohn as Imperial Director Orson Krennic, Donnie Yen as Chirrut, Mads Mikkelsen as Galen Erso, Alan Tudyk as the droid K2SO, Riz Ahmed as Body Rock, John Whedon as Baze Melbus, and Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera. Rather than centering on Jedi and Sith mythology, the film presents the conflict largely from the perspective of ordinary soldiers, spies, scientists, pilots, and civilians caught in the escalating war between the Rebel Alliance and the Empire. Its narrative ultimately explains the circumstances behind the famous opening crawl of Star Wars, which states that Rebel spies have stolen the plans to the Death Star and delivered them to the Alliance. The story begins with Jyn Erso, whose childhood is shaped by the rise of the Galactic Empire and the destruction of her family. Her father, Galen Erso, is a brilliant scientist whose expertise in energy technology is exploited by the Empire to complete the Death Star. Galen attempts to resist Imperial control, but Director Orson Krennic discovers him and forces him to return to the Imperial weapons program. Jyn's mother, Lara Erso, attempts to protect her family but is killed during the Imperial operation, while the young Jyn escapes and is eventually taken under the protection of Saw Gerrera, a radical resistance leader who raises her amid the growing struggle against the Empire. Years later, the adult Jyn is rescued from an Imperial prison by Rebel forces and brought into contact with the Alliance leadership. The Rebels have learned that Galen has secretly helped design a weakness into the Death Star, but they need evidence and intelligence to determine how the weapon can be destroyed. Jyn is therefore recruited because of her connection to Galen and because Saw Gerrera possesses crucial information about her father's activities. Jyn is introduced to Cassian Andor, an experienced rebel intelligence officer who has spent years carrying out morally difficult missions against the Empire. Cassion's mission is not simply to locate Galen but also to determine whether he can be trusted and, if necessary, eliminate him. Accompanying Jin and Cassion is K2SO, a reprogrammed Imperial security droid whose blunt personality, sarcasm, physical strength, and unconventional behavior make him one of the film's most distinctive characters. Their investigation leads them to Jeddah, a world with deep spiritual significance to followers of the Force and a major source of kyber crystals, which are used in the construction of the Death Star's superlaser. On Jeddah, they encounter Sajura and his extremist resistance movement, as well as Chirrut, a blind warrior and devoted believer in the Force, and his close companion Baze Melbus, a heavily armed fighter who protects him. Their journey becomes increasingly dangerous when the Empire tests the Death Star's destructive power on Jeddah City, demonstrating for the first time the terrifying scale of the weapon. After discovering evidence that Galen has deliberately sabotaged the Death Star's design, Jin and Cassion travel to Edu, where Galen is stationed with other Imperial scientists. During the operation, Cassion is given an opportunity to assassinate Galen but hesitates, while a rebel bombing attack ultimately destroys the Imperial facility. Jin's reunion with her father is brief and tragic, as Galen is fatally wounded during the attack. Before dying, he confirms that he intentionally created a weakness in the Death Star that could allow the entire station to be destroyed. The information gives the rebels a potential path to victory, but the Alliance leadership becomes divided over whether to openly confront the Empire. Many rebel leaders fear that the intelligence is unreliable and that a direct attack would result in catastrophic losses. Jin, however, becomes convinced that waiting for political consensus will only give the Empire more time to complete its plans. Jin therefore proposes an unauthorized mission to obtain the complete Death Star schematics from the Imperial Security Archive on Scarif, a heavily fortified tropical planet. Cassion chooses to join her, and a group of rebel soldiers and specialists volunteers to participate in what becomes a nearly suicidal operation. The team infiltrates Scarif under the name Rogue One and attempts to locate and transmit the Death Star plans to the rebel fleet. While Jin and Cassion enter the archive complex, the rest of the team fights Imperial forces across the planet, while rebel ships engage the Imperial fleet in one of the film's largest battles. The mission quickly develops into a desperate struggle against overwhelming Imperial numbers. As the rebels fight their way through the facility, K2SO sacrifices himself to help Jin and Cassion access the archive, while other members of the team, including Chirrut and Baze, also give their lives to ensure that the mission continues. Jin eventually reaches the archive's data tower and locates the Death Star plans, while Cassion assists her from inside the facility. The information is successfully transmitted to the rebel fleet, but the Imperial response becomes increasingly overwhelming. Director Krenwick arrives on Scarif and attempts to stop the transmission, only to confront Cassion and Jin. Before they can escape, the Death Star fires on the planet, creating catastrophic destruction across the battlefield. Although Jin and Cassion succeed in transmitting the plans, they are killed in the resulting devastation along with the other members of Rogue One. Their sacrifice nevertheless achieves its purpose. The Death Star plans reach the Rebel Alliance, providing the crucial information needed to identify the weapon's vulnerability. The film concludes almost immediately before the opening events of Star Wars 1977. The rebel fleet attempts to escape with the stolen information while Darth Vader arrives aboard an Imperial Star Destroyer and attacks the fleeing rebel ships. Vader boards a rebel vessel in an effort to recover the stolen plans, slaughtering numerous rebel soldiers as he pursues them through the corridors. Despite Vader's assault, the plans are transferred to another rebel ship and ultimately placed in the possession of Princess Leia Organa. As Vader watches the ship escape, Leia declares that the stolen data represents hope. The sequence flows directly into the beginning of the original Star Wars, creating a direct narrative bridge between the two films and transforming the previously unexplained opening crawl into the culmination of the sacrifices made by Jin, Cassion and her, and the other members of Rogue One. The film was conceived as a deliberate departure from the traditional visual and narrative style of the main Star Wars saga. Visual effects supervisor John Knoll originally developed the basic concept for Rogue One as an episode of the unproduced television project Star Wars: Underworld in the early 2000s. Following Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm in 2012, Knoll revived the idea as a feature film proposal, which eventually became the first Star Wars standalone movie. Gareth Edwards was hired to direct in 2014, and he approached the project as a military and espionage story rather than a conventional heroic space adventure. The filmmakers intentionally emphasized ground combat, battlefield strategy, covert operations, political divisions, sacrifice, and the human cost of rebellion. Unlike the mainline Star Wars films, Rogue One does not use the traditional opening crawl and largely avoids the iconic screen wipe transitions associated with the Skywalker saga, helping establish its identity as a more self-contained war story. Principal photography began at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire, England, in August 2015 and continued until February 2016, with filming also taking place at various locations to create the film's diverse planetary environments. The production subsequently underwent extensive reshoots in 2016, with Tony Gilroy becoming heavily involved in restructuring and refining the film. The reshoots altered significant portions of the story and helped shape the final tone, pacing, character relationships, and action sequences. The visual effects combined extensive digital environments and practical production elements to recreate the look of the original Star Wars era. The film also used digital recreations of younger versions of characters associated with the original trilogy, including Grand Moff Tarkin, portrayed through a combination of performance by Guy Henry and visual effects to reproduce Peter Cushing's likeness, as well as a brief digital recreation of Princess Leia using Carrie Fisher's appearance from the period. These effects attracted both praise for their technical achievement and criticism regarding the ethics and realism of digitally recreating deceased or digitally aged actors. The musical score was composed by Michael Giacchino, making Rogue One the first live-action Star Wars theatrical film not scored by John Williams. Giacchino incorporated thematic and orchestral elements associated with the broader Star Wars musical tradition while developing a distinctive musical identity for the film. The score reinforces the movie's darker atmosphere, military tension, emotional tragedy, and sense of impending doom while still connecting the story to the established musical language of the franchise. With an estimated production budget ranging from approximately $200 million to more than $280 million depending on the accounting source, Rogue One became one of the most expensive films produced at the time. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, premiered in Los Angeles on December 10, 2016. Before receiving its wide theatrical release in the United States on December 16, 2016. The film received generally positive reviews from critics, who particularly praised the performances, cinematography, visual effects, action sequences, production design, musical score, and darker war film tone. Felicity Jones, Diego Luna, Donnie Yen, Alan Tudyk, and the supporting cast received significant recognition for giving the story emotional weight despite its ensemble structure. Critics also praised the film for successfully expanding the Star Wars universe beyond the traditional Skywalker family narrative and for giving its characters a more grounded and morally complicated perspective and a galactic civil war. At the same time, some criticism focused on the film's uneven pacing, characterization, extensive reshoots, and reliance on digital recreations of characters from the original trilogy. Commercially, Rogue One became a major worldwide success, earning approximately $1.056 billion worldwide and ranking as the second highest-grossing film of 2016, behind Captain America: Civil War. It became the first Star Wars standalone film to surpass the billion-dollar mark and demonstrated the commercial potential of stories set outside the central Skywalker narrative. The film also received 2 Academy Award nominations, for Best Sound Mixing and Best Visual Effects, further recognizing its technical accomplishments. Its success helped establish the viability of additional standalone Star Wars projects, Although the subsequent release strategy for the franchise evolved considerably in the years that followed, the story of Rogue One was later expanded through the Disney Plus television series Andor, which serves as a direct prequel to the film and focuses primarily on Cassian Andor and the development of the wider rebel movement. Starring Diego Luna in the title role, Andor explores the political, social, and personal circumstances that eventually lead to the formation of the organized rebellion seen in Rogue One. The series ran for 2 seasons from 2022 to 2025, providing additional context for Cassian's transformation, the rise of the Rebel Alliance, imperial authoritarianism, and the sacrifices made by ordinary people resisting the Empire. Taken together, Rogue One and Andor provide a darker and more grounded exploration of the galactic civil war, emphasizing that the rebel victory depicted in the original trilogy was built not only on legendary Jedi and heroic leaders but also on the courage, intelligence, and ultimate sacrifices of countless ordinary individuals. The plot of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, begins on the remote planet Lamu, where research scientist Galen Erso lives in hiding with his wife Lyra Erso and their young daughter Jyn Erso. Galen is a brilliant scientist whose expertise in energy technology has been exploited by the Galactic Empire for the development of its ultimate weapon, the Death Star, a massive battle station capable of destroying an entire planet with a single blast. Galen has abandoned the Imperial project and attempted to disappear with his family, but his peaceful life comes to an abrupt end when Director Orson Krennic, the Imperial officer responsible for overseeing the Death Star's development, arrives on Lamu with the squad of Imperial troops. Krennic wants Galen back because the Empire needs his scientific knowledge to complete the super weapon. Galen initially refuses to cooperate, while Lyra confronts Krennic and attempts to protect her husband. During the confrontation, Lyra is shot and killed by Krennic's forces. Galen is taken away to continue working for the Empire, while the young Jyn escapes from the farm and hides in a rocky underground shelter. She is eventually found and rescued by Saw Gerrera, a militant resistance leader and longtime friend of the Erso family, who takes Jyn under his protection and raises her amid the growing struggle against Imperial rule. Approximately 15 years later, the Galactic Empire's plans for the Death Star are nearing completion. A former Imperial cargo pilot named Bodhi defects from the Empire after receiving a secret message from Galen. Bodhi travels to the moon Jeddah, intending to deliver the message to Saw Gerrera, but his defection is discovered by Imperial intelligence. Meanwhile, Rebel Alliance intelligence officer Cassian Andor learns about the existence of the Death Star and Bodhi's defection through an informant operating in the criminal settlement of Kafrene. Cassian is subsequently assigned to investigate the situation and determine the truth behind the mysterious Imperial super weapon. At the same time, Jyn has spent years moving from place to place and living under various identities after becoming separated from Saw's resistance movement. She is eventually captured by the Empire and sentenced to forced labor at an Imperial facility on Woodsboro. Her imprisonment comes to an end when rebel forces intercept her Imperial transport and free her, bringing her to the rebel base on Yavin 4. At the rebel base, Jyn is brought before Mon Mothma, one of the Alliance's leading political figures. The rebel leadership explains that intelligence has emerged suggesting that Jyn's father, Galen, is connected to the Death Star's development. Because Jyn knew Galen before he was taken by the Empire and because Saw Gerrera may possess additional information about him, the Alliance wants Jyn to travel to Jeddah and make contact with Saw. The immediate objective is to locate Galen and determine the extent of his involvement in the Imperial superweapon program. Jyn agrees to participate, although her relationship with the Rebel Alliance is initially distrustful and emotionally complicated. She is accompanied by Cassian Andor and K-2SO, a former Imperial security droid that Cassian has reprogrammed to serve the rebellion. Cassian is secretly given an additional order by his superiors, although Jyn has been told that the mission is intended to locate and possibly rescue her father. Cassian is instructed to kill Galen if necessary rather than allow him to remain a potential threat or Imperial asset. Jyn, Cassian, and K-2SO travel to Jeddah, a world of great spiritual significance because of its connection to the Force and its deposits of kyber crystals, which the Empire has begun mining on an enormous scale for use in the Death Star's superlaser. Jeddah City has become a center of conflict between Imperial occupation forces and Sawjira's increasingly radical resistance movement. As Jin and Kashan arrive in the city, they are caught in a violent confrontation between Saw's partisans and Imperial troops. During the chaos, they encounter Chirrut, a blind warrior and deeply spiritual guardian of the wills who possesses an unwavering faith in the Force, and his close companion Baze Melbus, a heavily armed fighter who protects Chirrut and supports his beliefs despite being more skeptical and practical. After helping Jin and Kashan survive the battle, Chirrut and Baze become involved in their mission and eventually join the group. Jin and Kashan are taken to Sawjira, who has captured Bodyrook and is holding him prisoner. Saw shows Jin a holographic recording left by her father. In the message, Galen reveals that he has been forced to work on the Death Star but has secretly sabotaged its design. Rather than attempting to prevent the weapon from being completed, Galen has deliberately engineered a structural vulnerability into the Death Star that could eventually allow the Rebel Alliance to destroy it. The weakness is connected to the weapon's power system and can be exploited if the rebels obtain the Death Star's complete technical plans. Galen explains that the information necessary to locate those plans is contained within the Imperial archives on Scarif, a heavily fortified tropical planet that serves as the Empire's central military data repository. The revelation gives the rebels their first realistic opportunity to defeat the Death Star. At the same time, the Empire demonstrates the terrifying power of its new weapon. Aboard the Death Star, Krennic orders the first major test of the superlaser. The weapon is fired at Jeddah City, destroying the city and killing countless people in an enormous explosion. The attack devastates the region and makes it clear that the Empire now possesses a weapon capable of changing the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Jin, Kashan, K2SO, Chirrut, Baze, and Body manage to escape Jeddah aboard a stolen Imperial transport, but in the confusion they are unable to recover the original recording from Saw's hideout. Saw refuses to flee, choosing to remain behind as the Death Star's attack destroys Jeddah City. His death marks the end of his increasingly isolated resistance movement and underscores the brutal cost of fighting the Empire. Following the destruction of Jeddah, Imperial leadership becomes increasingly concerned about the consequences of the Death Star project. Grand Moff Tarkin, one of the Empire's most powerful military commanders, recognizes Krennic's failures and uses the crisis surrounding Body's defection and the destruction of Jeddah as an opportunity to take direct control of the Death Star. Krennic is humiliated by Tarkin's intervention and becomes increasingly desperate to prove himself. Meanwhile, Jin and the others follow the information contained in Galen's message and travel to Edu, a remote and storm-ravaged planet where Galen works alongside other Imperial scientists at a secret research facility. Kashan is given an opportunity to assassinate Galen from a distance, fulfilling his original secret orders, but he hesitates when he sees Jin's father and realizes the personal consequences of killing him. Instead, the situation develops into a major rebel assault on the Imperial facility. Rebel bombers attack the Edu complex, creating chaos throughout the facility. During the battle, Jin manages to reach Galen, and father and daughter are finally reunited after years apart. Galen explains the truth about his work and the vulnerability he created within the Death Star. The reunion is tragically brief, however, as Galen is caught in the aftermath of the rebel attack and is fatally wounded. Jin holds her dying father as he passes away, leaving her devastated but also determined to ensure that his sacrifice has meaning. Jin and the surviving members of the group escape Edu aboard a stolen Imperial cargo shuttle. Their escape eventually leads them into direct conflict with the Empire, while Krennic is summoned to meet Darth Vader at his remote fortress. Krennic attempts to defend his position and seeks Vader's support in gaining an audience with Emperor Palpatine, hoping to restore his authority over the Death Star. Vader, however, refuses to indulge Krennic's ambition and uses the Force to choke him, warning him against creating further problems. After returning to the rebel base, Jin presents Galen's evidence and argues that the Alliance must immediately act against the Death Star. She proposes sending a force to Scarif to steal the weapon's complete technical plans. However, the rebel leadership is deeply divided. Many members of the Alliance Council believe that the evidence is insufficient, The Empire is too powerful, and an assault on Scarif would be virtually impossible. Political hesitation prevents the alliance from formally authorizing the operation. Frustrated by the leadership's unwillingness to act, Jin decides that waiting for official approval could mean losing their only opportunity. Cashin chooses to support her, and a small group of rebel volunteers joins them. They take the stolen Imperial shuttle and travel towards Scarif. Body gives the group the call sign Rogue One, which becomes the name associated with their unauthorized mission. The Rogue One team reaches Scarif and disguises itself using Imperial uniforms and equipment. Their stolen shuttle is able to pass through the planetary shield and enter the heavily defended Imperial installation. Once inside, Jin, Cashin, and K2SO infiltrate the Imperial data complex while the other members of the team launch an attack on the Imperial garrison to create a diversion. The operation quickly becomes a massive ground battle as rebel troops engage waves of Imperial stormtroopers and other military forces. The mission is complicated by the planet's enormous planetary shield, which prevents communications and prevents the stolen Death Star plans from being transmitted directly to the rebel fleet outside the system. Meanwhile, the Rebel Alliance learns that the unauthorized assault is underway after intercepting Imperial communications. Although the Alliance leadership had refused to officially approve Jin's plan, the seriousness of the situation eventually leads the rebel fleet to intervene. Admiral Rodus commands the rebel forces as they arrive at Scarif and engage the Imperial fleet in a massive space battle. Rebel starships attempt to disable the planetary shield while Imperial star destroyers move to defend the installation. The battle becomes increasingly desperate as both sides recognize that control of the Scarif data archive could determine the future of the galactic civil war. Inside the Imperial facility, Jin and Cashin locate the archive containing the Death Star plans. K2SO sacrifices himself while holding off Imperial troops, allowing Jin and Cashin to reach the data vault. Jin retrieves the information and begins the process of transmitting it to the rebel forces, but the planetary shield prevents the transmission from reaching the fleet. The ground battle then becomes a race against time as the Rogue One team attempts to establish a communications link while the rebel fleet fights to bring down the shield. Chiritasm takes part in the effort to activate the system needed to restore communication with the rebel fleet. Guided by his faith in the Force, he crosses an exposed battlefield and manually activates the necessary controls, but he is killed shortly afterward in the ensuing combat. Bas remains behind to protect Chirrut and continue the mission, but he too is killed when an Imperial attack destroys the surrounding area. Their deaths reinforce the film's central theme that the rebel victory is achieved through the sacrifices of individuals who know they may never survive to see the results of their actions. Bodyrook manages to establish contact with the rebel fleet and explains that the planetary shield must be disabled before the Death Star plans can be transmitted successfully. He is then killed by an Imperial grenade attack. His death occurs just as the rebel fleet begins to make progress in its assault on the Scarif defenses. Admiral Rodus orders a daring maneuver in which a rebel hammerhead corvette crashes into an Imperial Star Destroyer, pushing it into another Star Destroyer. The collision causes the two massive vessels to crash into the planetary shield structure, destroying the shield generator and finally opening a path for communication between the surface and the rebel fleet. With the shield down, Jin successfully transmits the Death Star plans toward the rebel command ship. However, the mission's final stage becomes even more dangerous when Director Krennic arrives at the facility. Krennic confronts Jin and attempts to stop her from completing the transmission. Cashin, who has survived the fighting, arrives and shoots Krennic, seriously wounding him. Jin reaches the top of the data tower with the transmitted plans while the rebel fleet struggles to survive the Imperial counterattack. The plans finally reach the rebel command ship, meaning that the mission has succeeded even though nearly every member of Rogue One has been killed. The victory is immediately followed by catastrophe. The Death Star arrives above Scarif, and Grand Moff Tarkin orders the weapon to fire on the Imperial Citadel. The Death Star's superlaser strikes the surface, creating a devastating explosion that destroys the facility and everything around it. Krennic is killed by the blast, while Jin and Cashin realize that they have no chance of escaping. The two embrace as the enormous shockwave approaches, accepting their fate together. Their deaths complete the mission's tragic arc. Neither Jin nor Cashin survives to receive recognition for what they have accomplished, but their actions ensure that the Death Star plans reach the Rebel Alliance. As the Rebel fleet attempts to escape into hyperspace, the situation remains extremely dangerous. Darth Vader arrives aboard his Star Destroyer and attacks the fleeing Rebel forces. His ship intercepts the Rebel command vessel carrying the Death Star plans, and Vader personally boards the ship. He cuts through Rebel soldiers with his lightsaber as he attempts to reach the stolen data and prevent the Alliance from escaping with the information. The Rebel defenders desperately attempt to transfer the plans to another vessel before Vader can seize them. At the last possible moment, the Death Star plans are transferred to a smaller Rebel ship, which manages to escape the larger battle. Vader watches helplessly as the vessel carrying the stolen plans flees into hyperspace. Aboard the escaping ship is Princess Leia Organa, who receives the plans and understands their enormous significance. When asked what the stolen information represents, Leia declares that it represents hope for the rebellion. The ship then escapes into hyperspace, carrying the Death Star plans that will eventually allow the Rebel Alliance to identify the weapon's vulnerability. The sequence leads directly into the opening events of Star Wars, 1977, transforming the famous opening crawl about Rebel spies stealing the Death Star plans into the culmination of the sacrifice made by Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, K2SO, Chirrut Îslam, Baze Melbus, Body Rock, and the many Rebel soldiers who gave their lives at Scarif. The cast of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, combines a central ensemble of original characters with returning figures from the wider Star Wars universe, alongside numerous supporting characters and cameos that connect the film directly to the original trilogy. Felicity Jones stars as Jyn Erso, the film's central protagonist, a rebellious and independent young woman whose life has been shaped by the Empire's persecution of her family. After spending years separated from her father, Galen Erso, and her childhood protector Saw Gerrera, Jyn is imprisoned by the Empire before being rescued by the Rebel Alliance and recruited for the mission to obtain the Death Star plans. Jones portrays Jyn as emotionally guarded, distrustful of political institutions, and initially reluctant to become involved in the larger rebellion, but she gradually becomes a determined leader willing to sacrifice herself for the Alliance. Bo Gadsden portrays 8-year-old Jyn, while Dolly Gadsden portrays Jyn at 4 years old, appearing in the opening portions of the film that establish her childhood and separation from her parents. Diego Luna portrays Cassian Andor, a Rebel Alliance captain and intelligence officer who has spent years conducting covert operations against the Galactic Empire. Cassian is an experienced soldier and spy who is accustomed to making difficult moral decisions in the name of the rebellion. He initially receives secret orders to kill Galen Erso rather than rescue him, but his relationship with Jyn and the increasingly personal nature of their mission lead him to reconsider the boundaries between duty, sacrifice, and morality. Ben Mendelsohn plays Director Orson Krennic, the ambitious Imperial officer responsible for advanced weapons development and one of the principal figures overseeing the completion of the Death Star. Krennic is portrayed as intelligent, ruthless, highly ambitious, and deeply concerned with his position within the Imperial hierarchy. His rivalry with Grand Moff Tarkin and his desire to receive recognition from Emperor Palpatine contribute to his increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control over the Death Star project. Donnie Yen portrays Chirrut Îslam, a blind warrior and spiritual devotee associated with the Guardians of the Whills on Jedha. Although he is neither a Jedi nor a Sith, Chirrut possesses an extraordinary belief in the Force and demonstrates exceptional physical and martial abilities despite his blindness. His faith, discipline, humor, and unwavering commitment to protecting others make him one of the film's most distinctive characters. He develops a close partnership with Baze Melbus, played by Zhang Wen, a heavily armed warrior and mercenary who has a long history with Chirrut. Baze was once devoted to the Guardians of the Whills but has become more skeptical and pragmatic, relying on his weapons and combat skills rather than Chirrut's spiritual faith. Despite their differences, Baze remains fiercely loyal to Chirrut and ultimately joins the Rogue One mission. Mads Mikkelsen portrays Galen Erso, Jin's father and a brilliant research scientist whose expertise in energy technology is exploited by the Empire during the construction of the Death Star. Galen is a fundamentally compassionate scientist who attempts to resist Imperial control while secretly embedding a vulnerability into the Death Star's design. His work becomes essential to the Rebel Alliance's eventual victory, although his efforts come at the cost of his freedom and ultimately his life. Alan Tudyk provides the voice on motion capture performance for K2SO, a former Imperial security enforcer droid that has been reprogrammed by Cashin to serve the Rebel Alliance. K2SO combines physical strength with an unusually blunt, sarcastic, and often socially inappropriate personality. His loyalty to Cashin and eventual sacrifice during the Scarif mission make him one of the most important members of the Rogue One team. Riz Ahmed plays Bodhi Rook, a former Imperial cargo pilot who defects to the rebel cause after being influenced by Galen Russell. Bodhi is responsible for carrying Galen's secret message to Saw Gerrera, making his defection an important catalyst for the events of the film. Although he is initially nervous and inexperienced in direct combat, Bodhi becomes an essential member of the mission because of his knowledge of Imperial transport systems and military procedures. Forrest Whitaker portrays Saw Gerrera, a veteran resistance fighter who had previously fought during the Clone Wars and later became one of the galaxy's most radical opponents of the Empire. Saw was a close friend of the Russell family and rescued and raised Jin after the death of her mother and the disappearance of her father. By the time of the film, he has become a hardened and increasingly extreme guerrilla leader whose methods are more aggressive than those of the mainstream Rebel Alliance. The film also features several major returning characters from previous Star Wars stories. Jimmy Smits reprises his role as Bail Organa, the respected senator and political leader who secretly supports the Rebel Alliance and is one of its most important early organizers. Genevieve O'Reilly returns as Mon Mothma, the senior rebel political leader who oversees the Alliance's military and diplomatic efforts and recruits Jin for the mission. Anthony Daniels briefly reprises his iconic role as C-3PO, while Jimmy V, uncredited, appears as R2-D2, with the two droids making a brief appearance at the rebel base. James Earl Jones returns as the voice of Darth Vader, the Sith Lord and one of the Empire's most feared enforcers. Vader is physically portrayed by Spencer Wilding during his confrontation with Krennic aboard the Star Destroyer, while Daniel Napros performs the character during the film's climactic sequence. Grand Moff Tarkin is portrayed by Guy Henry, with digital visual effects used to reproduce the likeness of the late Peter Cushing, who originally played the character in Star Wars, 1977. Henry also provides Tarkin's voice and performance, while digital facial effects are used to recreate Cushing's appearance. Tarkin is the senior Imperial commander who sees Krennic as an ambitious but unreliable subordinate and eventually takes control of the Death Star from him. Princess Leia Organa appears briefly at the end of the film and is portrayed physically by Ingvild Diala, with digital effects used to reproduce the likeness of Carrie Fisher from the original trilogy era. Archival audio of Fisher is also incorporated into Leia's dialogue. Her appearance provides the direct narrative connection between Rogue One and the opening moments of Star Wars, 1977. The cast also includes returning Rebel pilots Angus MacInnes as Gold Leader, Dutch Vendor and Drew Henley as Red Leader, Garvin Dries. Their appearances are created partly through previously unused footage from A New Hope, allowing the filmmakers to incorporate the original performances into the Battle of Scarif. MacInnes recorded additional dialogue for Dutch Vander, while archival material was used to construct new dialogue for Henley's character. David Ankrum, who originally voiced Wedge Antilles in A New Hope, also returns through a vocal cameo. These appearances help establish continuity between the events of Rogue One and the original trilogy's rebel forces. Among the additional returning and supporting characters, Ian McElhinney portrays General Jan Dodonna, a senior rebel military commander who later appears in A New Hope. Michael Smiley plays Dr. Ivazin, a character who briefly appeared in the original Star Wars film, while Andy de la Tour portrays General Hurst Ramadi and Tim Beckman plays Captain Ramus Antilles. Warwick Davis appears as Retief Sibi, a diminutive member of Sadra's partisans. Dave Filoni makes an appearance as the droid C-110P, also known as Chopper, reprising the character from Star Wars Rebels. Stephen Stanton provides the voice of Admiral Broadus, the Mon Calamari commander who leads the rebel fleet during the Battle of Scarif, while Paul Casey physically performs the character in costume. Duncan Powell portrays Sergeant True Scott Mashai, a rebel soldier who participates in the Scarif operation and later becomes associated with the broader rebel struggle. Alistair Petrie plays General David Straven, a senior rebel intelligence officer who oversees Cassian and provides the covert orders connected to Galen Russell. Ben Daniels portrays General Anthok Merrick, the rebel pilot and commander of Blue Squadron who participates in the Battle of Scarif. Valene Kane plays Lyra Russell, Jin's mother and Galen's wife, whose death during Krennic's arrival on Lamu becomes one of the defining tragedies of Jin's childhood and a major influence on her relationship with the Empire. Several actors portray members of the rebel political leadership. Jonathan Arreese appears as Senator Narjebel, Fares portrays Senator Vasp, and Sharon Duncan Brewster plays Senator Tinra Pamlo. Their characters participate in the political discussions surrounding the growing threat posed by the Empire and the question of whether the Rebel Alliance should openly commit to Jin's proposed attack on Scarif. Simon Farnaby appears as a member of Blue Squadron, while Jordan Stevens portrays Rebel Alliance member Corporal Tonk. Nick Ellington plays Beastan, an alien door gunner aboard a U-wing during the Battle of Scarif, while Ian White portrays Muraf, one of Sadra's partisans. Daniel Mays appears as Tivik, the informant whose information helps Cassian learn about the Death Star and Body Rook's defection. The film also contains several notable behind-the-scenes and franchise-related cameos. Rian Johnson, director of Star Wars: The Last Jedi, and producer Ram Bergman appear briefly as two Death Star technicians. These appearances are part of the film's broader collection of cameos and visual connections to other Star Wars productions. Collectively, the ensemble cast of Rogue One combines new characters such as Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, K-2SO, Chirrut, Baze Melbus, Body Rook, Galen Erso, and Orson Krennic, with established figures such as Darth Vader, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, Tarkin, Leia, C-3PO, R2-D2, and several rebel pilots. This mixture allows the film to function as a self-contained war story while simultaneously connecting its characters and events directly to the original Star Wars trilogy. The development of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, can be traced back to an idea conceived more than a decade before the film's eventual release. In 2003, while Star Wars Episode III: Revenge of the Sith was being produced in Sydney, John Knoll, who served as the visual effects supervisor on the Star Wars prequel trilogy, developed a story concept centered on the rebel spies who stole the Death Star plans shortly before the events of the original Star Wars. Knoll created a short treatment titled Destroyer of Worlds and initially proposed the concept as an episode for Star Wars: Underworld, an ambitious live-action television series that Lucasfilm was developing but that ultimately remained unproduced. The concept was inspired by the brief reference in the opening crawl of Star Wars to the rebel spies who had managed to steal the Death Star plans. Although the idea did not move forward at the time, Knoll continued to regard it as a potentially worthwhile Star Wars story. Following Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm in 2012, Knoll reconsidered the abandoned concept and decided to present it again as a feature film idea. He later explained that he felt compelled to pitch the project because otherwise he might always wonder what could have happened if he had pursued it. The concept eventually attracted the attention of Lucasfilm's new leadership as the studio began exploring films that could expand the franchise beyond the traditional Skywalker saga. This approach ultimately contributed to the creation of the Star Wars anthology series, which was designed to tell standalone stories set within the larger Star Wars universe while focusing on characters and events outside the main episodic films. In May 2014, Lucasfilm and Disney officially announced that Gareth Edwards had been hired to direct the project, while filmmaker and screenwriter Gary Whitta was brought on to write the screenplay. Edwards had previously directed Monsters and Godzilla, 2014, and his appointment reflected the studio's desire to give the standalone film a distinctive visual and dramatic identity. The project was initially described as a standalone Star Wars film focusing on the Rebel operation to steal the Death Star plans. In October 2014, cinematographer Greig Fraser confirmed that he had joined the production. Fraser's involvement became particularly important to the film's visual identity, as Edwards wanted the movie to have a grounded, realistic, and war-oriented appearance that would distinguish it from the more mythological visual style of the main Star Wars saga. In January 2015, it was reported that Gary Whitta had completed his work on the screenplay and would no longer remain involved with the project. Simon Kinberg was reportedly considered as a possible replacement, but later that month Chris Weitz was officially brought in to continue developing the screenplay. Weitz's involvement resulted in further restructuring of the story and characters as Lucasfilm refined the film's narrative direction. The project was officially titled Rogue One in March 2015. Establishing it as the first feature-length Star Wars film outside the numbered saga installments. The title also carried thematic significance within the story and the broader franchise, eventually being associated with the callsign used by Jyn Erso's team during their mission on Scarif. From the beginning, Gareth Edwards wanted Rogue One to feel substantially different from the traditional Star Wars films. Rather than presenting another heroic space fantasy adventure centered on Jedi, Sith, and the Skywalker family, Edwards envisioned the project as a war film set within the Star Wars universe. He described the story as morally complicated, emphasizing that warfare does not always produce simple divisions between heroes and villains. The film was therefore designed around soldiers, spies, intelligence officers, scientists, political leaders, and ordinary people caught in the struggle between the Rebel Alliance and the Galactic Empire. This approach allowed the filmmakers to explore the physical and emotional consequences of war while still retaining the spacecraft, stormtroopers, Imperial forces, Rebel fighters, and other recognizable elements of the franchise. The filmmakers also made a deliberate effort to establish a visual and structural identity separate from the Skywalker saga. One of the most significant decisions was the eventual removal of the traditional Star Wars opening crawl. Kathleen Kennedy explained in 2016 that the anthology films were not necessarily intended to use the same opening format as the saga installments. Edwards similarly argued that Rogue One was fundamentally different because its story already originated from the information presented in the opening crawl of the original Star Wars. In his view, beginning the film with another crawl would have created a stylistic and narrative repetition. Instead, the finished film begins with the title Rogue One after its opening sequence, immediately establishing that it belongs to the wider universe but is not another chapter of the main episodic saga. The film's ending also underwent an important evolution during development. Edwards initially assumed that Disney and Lucasfilm would not permit the principal characters to die, so an early version of the screenplay was developed in which the members of the Rogue One team survived their mission. However, the producers eventually decided that the story would be more powerful if the character's mission carried a genuinely tragic cost. The final concept called for Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, K-2SO, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Bodhi Rook, and the other members of the team to sacrifice themselves on Scarif while successfully delivering the Death Star plans to the Rebel Alliance. The original survival-oriented version was never filmed, and the production ultimately embraced the darker ending that became one of the film's defining characteristics. The screenplay continued to evolve through contributions from several writers. In addition to Gary Whitta and Chris Weitz, Tony Gilroy, Christopher McQuarrie, Scott Z. Burns, and Michael Arndt contributed to the script at different stages of development. These contributions reflected the unusually extensive writing and restructuring process through which the film passed. The story was repeatedly adjusted as the filmmakers refined the relationships between Jyn, Cassian, Galen, Saw, Krennic, and the other major characters, while also determining how the film would connect directly to Star Wars. 1977. The development process ultimately produced a story that combined espionage, military action, political conflict, family drama, and large-scale space combat. Principal photography began in August 2015 at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire, England, and continued into February 2016. The production also used a variety of locations and practical environments to create the film's different worlds, including the tropical battlefield of Gareth, the ancient city of Jeddah, the storm-covered planet Edu, and the remote agricultural world of Lamu. Edwards and cinematographer Greg Fraser sought to give the movie a more tactile and documentary-like visual quality, with the action often presented from the perspective of soldiers operating within chaotic battlefields rather than from the highly polished perspective traditionally associated with space fantasy spectacle. The filmmakers also incorporated practical sets, real-world environments, miniatures, visual effects, and extensive digital environments to recreate the technological and military aesthetic associated with the original trilogy. After principal photography concluded, however, the film underwent a substantial period of additional photography and restructuring. In May 2016, reports emerged that Rogue One would undergo approximately 5 weeks of reshoots. Tony Gilroy became heavily involved in the additional work, writing new material and serving in a major creative role during the second unit photography. The additional production was not simply limited to minor pickups. It involved significant work on the film's structure, pacing, character development, action sequences, and especially its conclusion. With Edwards' input, Gilroy also became deeply involved in the editing and additional photography process. The reshoots helped shape the version of the film ultimately released in theaters and strengthened its darker, more focused war film identity. The extent of Tony Gilroy's involvement was reflected in the final screenplay credits. In August 2016, Gilroy received screenplay credit alongside Chris Weitz and was reportedly paid approximately $5 million for his work on the project. Although Edwards remained the credited director, the extensive additional photography and restructuring generated considerable discussion about the production process. The final film represented the combined work of multiple writers and filmmakers who contributed at different stages, with Lucasfilm ultimately shaping the material into a cohesive standalone story. The extensive revisions were particularly important in establishing the film's climactic Scarif sequence and the tragic fate of the Rogue One team. Another important element of development was the decision to connect Rogue One visually and narratively to the original trilogy. Because the story takes place immediately before Star Wars, 1977, the filmmakers wanted the production design, spacecraft, costumes, weapons, military technology, and visual effects to feel consistent with the aesthetic of the original film while still benefiting from modern filmmaking technology. The production therefore recreated familiar elements such as Imperial Star Destroyers, X-Wing fighters, stormtroopers, rebel command centers, and the Death Star. The film also incorporated appearances by characters from the original trilogy, including Darth Vader, Grand Moff Tarkin, Princess Leia, C-3PO, R2-D2, and several rebel pilots, strengthening the connection between Rogue One and the events that follow. The use of digitally recreated characters was another major technical and creative component of the film's development. Grand Moff Tarkin, originally played by Peter Cushing in Star Wars, was portrayed through a combination of actor Guy Henry's performance and digital visual effects designed to reproduce Cushing's likeness. Similarly, the filmmakers digitally recreated a younger Princess Leia using actress Ingvild Dila as the physical performer combined with visual effects based on Carrie Fisher's appearance from the original trilogy era. These techniques allowed the filmmakers to place characters from the 1977 film directly into the new story. Although the digital recreations later became a subject of discussion and criticism among audiences and critics, the meaning of the title Rogue One was also deliberately developed to operate on several levels. During the 2016 Star Wars celebration, Gareth Edwards explained that the title had 3 interconnected meanings. First, it evokes a military call sign, eventually becoming the designation used by Jyn Erso and her team during the Scarif operation. Second, it refers to the film itself as a rogue entry in the franchise, since it was the first theatrical Star Wars movie that was not part of the numbered Skywalker saga. Third, the title reflects Jyn Erso's personality, describing her as an independent and rebellious individual who does not naturally conform to authority or established institutions. This multiple meaning helped reinforce the film's themes of independence, rebellion, and sacrifice. Ultimately, the development of Rogue One transformed John Knoll's long-dormant idea from a proposed Star Wars Underworld episode into a major theatrical production. The project evolved through multiple writers, extensive screenplay revisions, a change in creative direction, significant reshoots, and an intentional shift toward the tone and structure of a war film. Gareth Edwards and the production team sought to create a movie that could stand independently from the Skywalker saga while still functioning as a direct bridge to Star Wars. 1977. The final result was a standalone story centered on characters who were largely absent from the traditional mythology of the franchise, with their sacrifices explaining one of the most important events in Star Wars history: how the Rebel Alliance obtained the Death Star plans that ultimately made the destruction of the Empire's super weapon possible. The casting process for Rogue One, a Star Wars story, began taking shape in early 2015, as Lucasfilm and director Gareth Edwards searched for an ensemble that could support the film's more grounded, war film-oriented approach while introducing characters who had not previously appeared in the main Star Wars saga. Because the story centered on a new female protagonist rather than one of the established Skywalker family members, considerable attention was initially focused on finding the right actress to portray Jyn Erso, a rebellious young woman whose personal history is closely connected to the Empire and the development of the Death Star. In January 2015, reports indicated that actresses including Tatiana Maslany, Rooney Mara, and Felicity Jones were among those being considered for the lead role. The casting process reflected the studio's desire to find an actress capable of carrying a large-scale action film while also conveying Jyn's emotional isolation, determination, vulnerability, and gradual transformation into a committed member of the rebel cause. By February 2015, Felicity Jones had emerged as the leading candidate and entered final negotiations to headline the film. At the same time, Aaron Paul, Atilde and Edgar Ramirez were reportedly being considered for an important male role, although neither ultimately joined the cast. In March 2015, Jones was officially confirmed as Jyn Erso, establishing her as the central character around whom the new standalone story would be constructed. Jones's casting proved particularly significant because Jyn was intended to be different from the traditional heroic figures of the franchise. Rather than beginning as an idealistic rebel soldier, Jyn was written as a hardened and independent young woman who had become distrustful of political organizations and authority after years of instability. The filmmakers therefore needed a performer capable of balancing action-oriented physicality with a more intimate emotional performance. During the same period, Lucasfilm continued searching for the remaining principal cast members. In March 2015, reports emerged that Ben Mendelsohn was being considered for a major role. Mendelsohn's eventual casting became one of the key additions to the project because his performance as director Orson Krennic required an actor capable of portraying an ambitious imperial officer whose authority is constantly threatened by the Empire's internal hierarchy. In April 2015, Sam Claflin was reportedly being considered for an unspecified role, while Riz Ahmed entered negotiations to join the film. These reports demonstrated that the production was assembling a diverse international ensemble rather than relying exclusively on established Star Wars performers. In May 2015, the film's principal ensemble began to take its final form when Ben Mendelsohn, Riz Ahmed, and Diego Luna were officially added in major roles. Mendelsohn was ultimately cast as Orson Krennic, while Ahmed was cast as Bodhi Rock, a former Imperial cargo pilot whose defection provides the rebels with crucial information about the Death Star. Diego Luna was cast as Cassian Andor, a rebel intelligence officer and captain who becomes Jyn's principal partner during the mission to steal the Death Star plans. Luna's casting was particularly important because Cassian was designed as a morally complicated soldier rather than a conventional heroic figure. His background in intelligence operations and willingness to make difficult decisions gave the character a more grounded connection to the film's espionage and military themes. The production continued expanding the cast over the following months. In June 2015, Forrest Whitaker was cast in a major role that was subsequently revealed to be Saw Gerrera, a veteran resistance fighter who had previously appeared in the animated Star Wars The Clone Wars continuity. Whittaker's casting helped connect Rogue One to the wider Star Wars universe while allowing the filmmakers to reinterpret a previously established character in live action. Saw was written as an older, more radical version of the Resistance fighter seen in earlier Star Wars stories, and Whittaker brought considerable dramatic weight to the character's complicated relationship with Jyn and the Russo family. In July 2015, Jonathan Arreese was cast as Senator Nour Jebel, adding another figure to the film's rebel political leadership. The production also confirmed Genevieve O'Reilly as Mon Mothma, with O'Reilly reprising the role she had originally played in Star Wars, Episode III: Revenge of the Sith. Her return was particularly notable because O'Reilly's version of Mon Mothma had appeared only briefly in the prequel film, and Rogue One provided an opportunity to expand the character's importance as one of the principal political leaders of the Rebel Alliance. As production moved forward, Lucasfilm continued assembling the film's international ensemble and supporting cast. Donnie Yen was cast as Chirrut Tasm, a blind warrior and spiritual follower of the Force associated with the Guardians of the Whills, while Zhong Wen was cast as Baze Melbus, Chirrut's longtime companion and protector. Their casting added a distinct martial arts and international dimension to the film, with Donnie Yen bringing his extensive experience in action cinema to the role. The characters were deliberately conceived as non-Jedi figures who nevertheless have a strong connection to the Force and its spiritual traditions. Their inclusion reinforced the film's broader approach of exploring the Star Wars universe from perspectives outside the traditional Jedi-Sith conflict. Mads Mikkelsen was cast as Galen Erso, Jyn's father and a brilliant scientist whose forced involvement in the Death Star project becomes central to the story. Mikkelsen's casting gave the film an experienced dramatic performer capable of portraying Galen as both a scientist caught in an authoritarian system and a father attempting to protect his daughter. Alan Tudyk joined the production as the performer behind K-2SO, the former Imperial security droid reprogrammed to serve the Rebel Alliance. Tudyk's performance combined voice acting with motion capture work, allowing K-2SO to function as both the major supporting character and a source of humor within the otherwise serious and increasingly tragic narrative. The casting process also included the selection of the younger performers who would portray Jyn during the opening sections of the film. Bo Gadsden was cast as the approximately 8-year-old version of Jyn, while her younger sister Dolly Gadsden portrayed Jyn at approximately 4 years old. Their performances were important to establishing Jyn's family history, particularly the traumatic events surrounding Krennic's arrival on Lamu, the death of Lyra Erso, and Galen's forced removal by the Empire. Valene Kane was subsequently cast as Lyra Erso, allowing the film to establish Jyn's relationship with her mother and explain the origins of her hostility toward the Empire. The production also brought back several performers from earlier Star Wars films. Jimmy Smits returned as Bail Organa, reprising the character he had played in the prequel trilogy. Genevieve O'Reilly returned as Mon Mothma, while Anthony Daniels reprised his iconic role as C-3PO. Jimmy V performed as R2-D2. Although his participation was uncredited, these returning performers were part of the filmmakers' effort to create continuity between Rogue One and the established chronology of the original and prequel trilogies. One of the most significant returning performances involved Darth Vader. In June 2016, it was confirmed that James Earl Jones would once again provide Vader's iconic voice. The character's physical performance was handled by Spencer Wilding during Vader's confrontation with Krennic and aboard the Star Destroyer, while Daniel Napros portrayed Vader during the climactic sequence near the end of the film. This combination of performers allowed the filmmakers to recreate the physical presence and distinctive voice of the character while positioning Vader within the story immediately before the events of Star Wars. 1977. The production also cast performers to portray digitally recreated versions of characters from the original trilogy. Guy Henry portrayed Grand Moff Tarkin, with visual effects used to digitally reproduce the likeness of the late Peter Cushing, who originally played Tarkin in the 1977 film. Henry also supplied Tarkin's performance and voice. Similarly, Ingvild Deala portrayed the young Princess Leia Organa, with digital effects used to reproduce Carrie Fisher's appearance from the original trilogy era. Archival audio associated with Fisher was incorporated into Leia's dialogue. These casting and visual effects decisions were particularly important because Rogue One ends only moments before the beginning of Star Wars 1977, making the presence of Tarkin and Leia an important bridge between the two films. The filmmakers also incorporated performers from the original Star Wars production through archival footage and recreated dialogue. Angus MacInnes returned as Gold Leader Dutch Vander, while Dr. Henley appeared as Red Leader Gareth Dries, with previously unused footage from A New Hope incorporated into the Battle of Scarif. MacInnes recorded additional dialogue for his character, while archival material was used to reconstruct dialogue for Henley's character. David Ankrum, who originally voiced Wedge Antilles in A New Hope, also contributed a vocal cameo. These appearances were designed to make the final battle feel like a direct historical continuation of the rebel struggle depicted in the original trilogy. The supporting cast continued to expand with numerous actors portraying rebel commanders, Imperial personnel, politicians, partisans, pilots, and other characters. Ian McElhinney was cast as General Jan Dodonna, while Alistair Petrie played General David Straven, the rebel intelligence officer responsible for Cashin's covert assignment. Ben Daniels portrayed General Anthok Merrick, a rebel pilot and commander who participates in the Battle of Scarif. Duncan Powell played Sergeant True Scott Mackay, while Stephen Stanton provided the voice of Admiral Rodus, the Mon Calamari commander of the rebel fleet, with Paul Casey performing Rodus physically in costume. Warwick Davis was cast as Retief Sebi, a member of Saw's partisans, while Ian White portrayed Murph, another member of Saw's group. Other supporting performers included Fares as Senator Vasper, Sharon Duncan Brewster as Senator Tinra Pamlo, and Jonathan Aris as Senator Nour Jebel. Michael Smiley appeared as Dr. Ravizan, a character previously seen in A New Hope, while Andy de la Tour portrayed General Hurst Ramadi and Tim Beckman played Captain Ramus Antilles. Daniel Mays appeared as Tivik, the informant who provides Cashin with important information about the Empire's super weapon. Nick Ellington portrayed Bistan, the alien door gunner aboard a rebel U-wing during the Scarif battle, while Jordan Stevens played Rebel Corporal Tonk. Simon Farnaby appeared as a member of Blue Squadron. The film also incorporated cameos connecting it with the wider animated and cinematic Star Wars universe. Dave Filoni, a major creative figure associated with Star Wars animation, appeared as C-110P, or Chopper, the astromech droid originally introduced in Star Wars Rebels. The appearance was an especially notable connection between the live-action and animated sides of the franchise. In addition, Rian Johnson, director of Star Wars: The Last Jedi, and producer Ram Bergman made brief cameo appearances as Death Star technicians. These appearances contributed to the film's extensive collection of franchise references and hidden connections. Overall, the casting of Rogue One was designed to balance a completely new ensemble of protagonists with recognizable characters and performers from the established Star Wars continuity. Felicity Jones was selected to anchor the film as Jyn Erso, while Diego Luna, Ben Mendelsohn, Riz Ahmed, Donnie Yen, John Wen, Mads Mikkelsen, Alan Tudyk, and Forrest Whitaker formed the principal supporting ensemble. The filmmakers then surrounded them with returning performers such as James Earl Jones, Genevieve O'Reilly, Jimmy Smits, Anthony Daniels, and the extensive group of actors and visual effects performers recreating characters from the original trilogy. The result was a deliberately international and diverse cast that allowed Rogue One to function as both an independent war drama and a direct narrative bridge into the events of the original Star Wars film. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story had its world premiere at the Pantages Theater in Hollywood, Los Angeles, on December 10, 2016. Marking the beginning of the film's theatrical rollout. Following the Los Angeles premiere, the film opened in selected European markets on December 14, 2016, before expanding to North America on December 16, 2016. The release strategy positioned Rogue One as the first standalone Star Wars film to receive a major worldwide theatrical launch outside the numbered Skywalker saga. The film subsequently reached the Chinese market on January 6, 2017, completing its major international theatrical rollout. Its December release placed it directly within the lucrative holiday movie-going period and helped the film become one of the most commercially successful theatrical releases of 2016. The film's theatrical presentation was supported by a broad range of premium formats and exhibition technologies, allowing audiences to experience its large-scale space battles, ground combat, visual effects, and cinematography on larger screens. Unlike the numbered Star Wars films, Rogue One deliberately avoided the traditional opening crawl, reinforcing its identity as a standalone anthology entry while still functioning as a direct prequel to Star Wars. 1977. The theatrical release also benefited from the film's close narrative connection to the original trilogy, particularly its depiction of the Rebel Alliance's mission to obtain the Death Star plans immediately before the events of the 1977 film. Following its theatrical run, Rogue One entered the home entertainment market in 2017. The film was released digitally on March 24, 2017. Giving audiences the opportunity to purchase or digitally access the movie several months after its theatrical debut. Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment subsequently released the film on physical media on April 4, 2017, including Blu-ray, Blu-ray 3D, and DVD editions. These releases contained the feature film alongside supplemental material that provided additional insight into the production, characters, visual effects, and filmmaking process behind the first standalone Star Wars theatrical movie. The home video release proved commercially successful. Rogue One generated approximately $81.1 million in home video revenue and sold nearly 4 million units, making it the third best-selling home video title of 2017, behind Disney's Moana and Beauty and the Beast. Its strong physical media performance reflected the continued popularity of the Star Wars brand and the film's appeal to both longtime franchise audiences and viewers who had responded positively to its standalone war film approach. The film later received a 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray release on March 31, 2020, providing an upgraded home presentation with higher resolution picture quality and expanded high dynamic range capabilities. The 4K release was accompanied by reissues of the film on Blu-ray and DVD, allowing Rogue One to remain available across multiple generations of physical home media formats. The Ultra HD edition also ensured that the film's extensive visual effects work, large-scale space battles, detailed production design, and Greig Fraser's cinematography could be experienced with modern home theater technology. In 2022, Disney gave Rogue One another significant theatrical presentation as part of the promotional campaign for Ender, the Disney Plus prequel series centered on Diego Luna's character, Cassian Andor. On August 26, 2022, Rogue One was re-released in more than 150 IMAX theaters across the United States and Canada. This limited theatrical event was designed to reconnect audiences with Cassian's story shortly before the premiere of Ender. The special screenings also included an exclusive preview of the Disney Plus series, providing audiences with an advanced look at the upcoming television series before its 3-episode premiere on September 21, 2022. The 2022 IMAX re-release was particularly significant because Ender expanded upon the character and political world introduced in Rogue One. Rather than functioning simply as a conventional anniversary screening, the theatrical event served as a bridge between the 2016 film and the new television series. The re-release allowed audiences to revisit Cassian's transformation from an experienced rebel intelligence operative into one of the central figures of the broader Resistance narrative, while also emphasizing the continuity between the film and the subsequent series. As a result, Rogue One has maintained an unusually long release life compared with a conventional theatrical film. Its original December 2016 theatrical release, 2017 digital and physical home media editions, 2020 Ultra HD Blu-ray release, and 2022 IMAX theatrical re-release have allowed the film to remain accessible across changing forms of movie distribution. Its continued presence in the franchise was further reinforced by Ender, which expanded the character of Cassian Andor and explored the political and personal circumstances that ultimately lead toward the events depicted in Rogue One. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story was a major worldwide commercial success, ultimately grossing approximately $1.059 billion at the global box office. The film earned about $534.9 million in the United States and Canada and a further $523.9 million from international markets, bringing its worldwide total to roughly $1.059 billion. Its performance was particularly notable because it was the first Star Wars theatrical film outside the main Skywalker saga, meaning it did not have the same built-in narrative position as a numbered sequel such as The Force Awakens. Nevertheless, the film's strong audience interest, connection to the original trilogy, holiday release date, and positive word-of-mouth enabled it to become one of the highest-grossing films of 2016, according to Deadline Hollywood. After taking production costs, marketing expenses, talent participation, and other expenditures into account, Rogue One generated an estimated $319.6 million in net profit, placing it third on the publication's list of the most valuable blockbusters of 2016. Before its release, expectations for Rogue One were extremely high, although industry analysts generally did not expect it to approach the extraordinary commercial performance of Star Wars: The Force Awakens. In late November 2016, domestic opening weekend projections generally placed the film in the range of $100 million to $150 million in the United States and Canada. Disney chairman Bob Iger also acknowledged that the studio did not expect the standalone film to replicate The Force Awakens, which had ultimately grossed about $2.1 billion worldwide and opened domestically to approximately $248 million. The distinction was important because Rogue One was intentionally designed as a standalone anthology film rather than as the next numbered installment in the principal saga. Even with more modest expectations, however, advance interest proved exceptionally strong. Advance ticket sales demonstrated the enormous level of anticipation surrounding the film. Tickets went on sale at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on November 28, 2016, and within roughly 10 minutes, major ticketing websites including Fandango experienced crashes caused by the enormous volume of traffic. The incident recalled the ticketing problems surrounding The Force Awakens the previous year. During its first 24 hours of availability, Rogue One recorded the second highest number of advance ticket sales ever recorded, surpassed only by The Force Awakens. Based on these early indicators, worldwide opening weekend projections were estimated at approximately $280 million to $350 million, demonstrating the expectation that the film would become one of the holiday season's dominant theatrical releases. The film opened strongly in the United States and Canada with substantial preview and opening day business. During Thursday night previews, Rogue One earned approximately $29 million, making it the highest-grossing Thursday preview opening of 2016 at the time. On Friday, its first full day of release, the film generated approximately $71.1 million, followed by another $46.3 million on Saturday. These figures gave the film an opening weekend total of approximately $155.1 million. Making it the third biggest domestic opening weekend of 2016. The performance confirmed that audiences were willing to embrace a Star Wars story that did not center on the traditional Skywalker family and instead focused on a group of rebel operatives undertaking a dangerous military mission. Rogue One maintained its dominance during its second weekend despite the expected decline that accompanies the release of a major blockbuster. The film earned approximately $64 million during its second three-day weekend, representing a decline of around 58.7% from its opening weekend. When the extended four-day holiday period was included, the film generated approximately $96.1 million. Its strong holiday performance was further demonstrated on Christmas Day, when it earned approximately $25.9 million in the United States and Canada. The film therefore remained the #1 movie at the domestic box office for its second consecutive weekend and continued to benefit from the Christmas and New Year holiday period. The film also remained at the top of the domestic box office during its third weekend, demonstrating unusually strong staying power for a major December blockbuster. It turned approximately $49.6 million during the three-day weekend, a comparatively modest decline of about 22.5% from the previous weekend, while the four-day holiday weekend produced approximately $65.5 million. Its ability to retain a large audience through the holiday period was an important factor in its eventual domestic total and reflected the positive response the film received from audiences. Rather than experiencing a sharp collapse after its opening, Rogue One continued to generate substantial ticket sales throughout the Christmas and New Year period. The film's run at the top of the box office finally ended during its fourth weekend. Initial Sunday estimates suggested that Rogue One would earn approximately $22 million, narrowly surpassing the newly released historical drama Hidden Figures, which was initially projected at around $21.8 million. However, the final figures released the following day showed that Rogue One had actually earned approximately $21.9 million for the weekend, while Hidden Figures finished ahead with approximately $22.8 million. As a result, Rogue One fell to second place after spending 3 consecutive weekends at number 1. Over the remainder of its theatrical run, Rogue One continued accumulating substantial revenue in North America and international markets, eventually reaching approximately $534.9 million domestically and $523.9 million internationally. Its international performance was particularly significant because the film's story was deeply connected to the original Star Wars mythology while still functioning as a standalone narrative. Combined with its domestic earnings, the film's worldwide gross reached approximately $1.059 billion. Making it one of the most successful films of 2016 and one of the most commercially successful standalone Star Wars productions. The film's financial success extended beyond its theatrical box office. Its strong home entertainment performance contributed to its overall profitability, helping Deadline Hollywood calculate an estimated $319.6 million net profit after accounting for the film's production budget, marketing campaign, talent participation, and other expenses. The combination of theatrical revenue and home media income placed Rogue One among the most financially valuable films released during 2016, ranking third in Deadline's assessment of the year's most valuable blockbusters. Years after its original theatrical run, Rogue One also demonstrated continued audience demand through a special IMAX re-release on August 26, 2022. Time to promote the upcoming Disney Plus series Ender. The film returned to more than 150 IMAX theaters across the United States and Canada and earned approximately $1.1 million during the re-release weekend. This additional theatrical run brought its cumulative IMAX gross to approximately $105 million, placing it among the top 10 highest-grossing IMAX films of all time according to the figures cited for the re-release. The event was particularly meaningful because Ender expanded the story of Diego Luna's cash in Ender, one of the central characters introduced in Rogue One. Overall, Rogue One's box office trajectory demonstrated that a Star Wars film could achieve blockbuster-level success without being part of the numbered Skywalker saga. Its approximately $155.1 million domestic opening weekend, sustained holiday season performance, $534.9 million domestic gross, $523.9 million international gross, and $1.059 billion worldwide total established it as a major commercial hit. Its estimated $319.6 million net profit further confirmed its financial strength, while its later IMAX re-release and continued association with Ender demonstrated the film's lasting popularity within the Star Wars franchise. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, received generally favorable critical reviews, with particular praise directed toward its darker war film tone, visual design, cinematography, action sequences, ensemble performances, musical score, and its ability to expand the original Star Wars mythology while remaining closely connected to the 1977 film. Critics also recognized the film as a stylistically distinct entry in the franchise, particularly because it focused on ordinary soldiers, spies, intelligence operatives, scientists, and political figures rather than Jedi or Sith. At the same time, some reviewers criticized the screenplay for uneven characterization, heavy exposition, pacing issues, and an over-reliance on existing Star Wars mythology. The film's extensive use of digital recreation for characters from the original trilogy also generated mixed reactions, particularly concerning the visual recreation of Grand Moff Tarkin. On Rotten Tomatoes, Rogue One holds an 84% approval rating based on 459 critic reviews, with an average rating of 7.5. The site's critical consensus praised the film for drawing deeply from established Star Wars mythology while simultaneously introducing new narrative and aesthetic ideas, describing it as evidence of the franchise's potential to successfully expand beyond the traditional saga structure. On Metacritic, the film received a weighted score of 65 out of 100 based on 51 critics, corresponding to a classification of generally favorable reviews. Audience reaction was also strongly positive. Viewers surveyed by CinemaScore awarded the film an A grade on its A+ to F scale, while Post-Track reported an overall positive audience score of approximately 91%. These figures indicated that the film's darker and more militaristic approach was broadly accepted by audiences despite its differences from the mainline Star Wars movies. A major source of critical praise was the film's ability to create a more grounded and militaristic interpretation of the Star Wars universe. Many reviewers appreciated Gareth Edwards' decision to approach the material like a war film, emphasizing the uncertainty, sacrifice, fear, and moral ambiguity associated with armed conflict. The film's protagonists are not presented as invincible heroes. Instead, they are soldiers and intelligence operatives who frequently make morally difficult decisions and understand that their mission may cost them their lives. This approach gave the film a more serious tone and helped distinguish it from the traditional heroic structure of the Skywalker saga. Critics particularly praised the final act on Scarif, where the film combines a large-scale ground assault, a space battle, and an intelligence operation into a single extended sequence built around the characters' willingness to sacrifice themselves for the rebel cause. Eric Goldman of IGN awarded the film 9 out of 10, praising the difficult task of creating a story that directly connects with Star Wars 1977, while still functioning as its own narrative. Goldman considered the connection to the original film a potentially difficult creative challenge but believed that Rogue One handled it effectively and clearly. He particularly praised the film's visual aesthetic, arguing that its distinctive look helped establish an identity separate from the main saga. He also highlighted the performances of Felicity Jones, Diego Luna, and Alan Tudyk. However, Goldman criticized the digital recreation of one of the original trilogy characters, arguing that the computer-generated appearance produced an uncomfortable uncanny valley effect that distracted from the otherwise convincing visual work. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone gave Rogue One a 4-star review, praising its connection to the atmosphere and mythology of the original trilogy as well as Gareth Edwards' direction and the film's pacing. Travers particularly admired Felicity Jones' performance as Jyn Erso and the large-scale action sequences of the third act. He considered the climactic material especially effective because it combined spectacle with genuine dramatic stakes. However, he felt that some of the film's exposition occasionally interfered with its character interactions, suggesting that the movie sometimes prioritized explaining its place within Star Wars continuity over allowing its characters to develop naturally through dialogue and relationships. Peter Serretta of Slash Film awarded the film 8 out of 10, praising its darker tone, action sequences, visual presentation, and Michael Giacchino's musical score. He argued that the movie actually enhanced the original Star Wars experience by providing additional context for the Death Star plans and the Rebel mission referenced at the beginning of the 1977 film. From this perspective, Rogue One functioned not merely as a prequel but as a story that gave greater emotional and historical meaning to events audiences already knew. Serretta nevertheless believed the film's extensive ensemble cast and relatively large amount of narrative material left insufficient room for deeper characterization, particularly among some of the secondary protagonists. Justin Chang of the Los Angeles Times was similarly enthusiastic, particularly praising Greig Fraser's cinematography and the film's large-scale action sequences. Chang believed the film successfully justified its existence as a standalone addition to the Star Wars franchise and praised the performances throughout the ensemble, with particular attention to Donnie Yen, Diego Luna, and Felicity Jones. He also argued that the ensemble structure supported the film's underlying anti-fascist themes, because the story emphasizes how resistance movements are formed from groups of individuals with different backgrounds, beliefs, and methods. Chang also noted that the movie's brisk pacing may have been partly influenced by the filmmaker's desire to avoid the slower narrative rhythms that had frequently been criticized in the prequel trilogy. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian awarded Rogue One 4 stars, describing it as a muscular and skillful variation on familiar Star Wars themes and imagery. He particularly appreciated the film's depiction of the Death Star and its attempt to explore the military machinery of the Empire from a different perspective. Bradshaw praised performances from Mads Mikkelsen, Ben Mendelsohn, Felicity Jones, Alan Tudyk, Donnie Yen, and Diego Luna, noting the strength of the ensemble. However, he argued that despite its title, the movie never truly became as unconventional or rebellious as its premise might suggest. He also viewed its release as closely connected to the cultural momentum created by Star Wars: The Force Awakens, suggesting that the film remained firmly within the established franchise formula despite its standalone status. Mark Kermode, also writing for The Guardian, gave the film 4 stars and strongly praised its diverse ensemble. He particularly admired Felicity Jones' portrayal of Jyn Erso and compared aspects of her character to Ellen Ripley from Millions. Kermode also praised the cinematography and staging of the battle sequences, which he found evocative of real-world military conflicts, including the Normandy landings and the Vietnam War. The film's standalone status was, in his view, one of its greatest strengths because it allowed the filmmakers to establish genuine dramatic consequences. Since the audience already knew that the Death Star plans would eventually reach the rebels, the tension came not from whether the mission would succeed but from what the characters would have to sacrifice to achieve that success. Not all critics were equally enthusiastic. Ann Hornaday of The Washington Post gave the film a more critical assessment, describing it as comparatively simplistic and suggesting that it functioned partly as a placeholder between major installments of the franchise. Although she praised its visual aesthetic, Michael Giacchino's score, and darker tone, she argued that the plot itself was insufficiently original and did not always capture the particular emotional and adventurous quality associated with earlier Star Wars films. Nevertheless, Hornaday considered it superior to the prequel trilogy, indicating that even her criticism was tempered by an appreciation for its stronger visual execution and more grounded approach. David Ehrlich of IndieWire gave the film a C+, describing it as an energetic but excessively safe attempt to maintain momentum between the major Star Wars installments. Ehrlich praised the opening sequence, production design, visual effects, and particularly the climactic final act, which he felt successfully recreated the sense of wonder associated with the original trilogy. He also appreciated the way the film reconciled elements of the original and newer Star Wars movies. However, he believed the film suffered from limited character development and from the restrictions imposed by its requirement to connect directly to a pre-existing story. In his assessment, the necessity of arriving at the exact circumstances of Star Wars, 1977, reduced the film's ability to develop completely independently.